Welcome back to the Velvet Paw Café, where time slows down and worries fade away. The morning arrived with a hush, that particular kind of silence that comes only when the world has been blanketed in fresh snow during the night. Outside the tall windows of the cafe, fat snowflakes drifted down in lazy spirals, catching the early light and transforming the garden into something from a watercolor painting. All soft edges and gentle whites and greys. Inside, the cafe held its own kind of magic. The warmth from the old radiators mixing with the rich aroma of dark roast coffee and the sweet scent of cinnamon rolls that Daniel had delivered just before dawn, still warm in their wicker basket. Emma stood behind the counter, her hands wrapped around her own mug of coffee, watching the snow accumulate on the garden path with a contentment that came from knowing that today would be a quiet day, a slow day, the kind of day where customers would trickle in seeking refuge from the cold rather than rushing through on their way to somewhere else. She had arrived an hour before opening, as she always did, to prepare the cafe for the day. But this morning felt different, touched by the magic of first snow, that annual gift that transformed the familiar into something wondrous and new. Luna had already claimed her spot on the wide windowsill, her grey fur looking almost silver in the pale morning light. The elderly cat sat with perfect posture, her tail wrapped neatly around her paws, her amber eyes tracking each snowflake's journey from sky to earth with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every single one. There was something meditative about watching Luna watch the snow, and Emma found herself doing just that, her coffee growing lukewarm in her hands as she let the peace of the morning settle into her bones like the warmth from the fireplace that Oliver had already claimed. The ginger cat stretched out on the hearthrug in a patch of flickering golden light. The cafe looked particularly beautiful this morning, Emma thought, though perhaps she was biased, or perhaps it was simply that everything looked more beautiful under the softening filter of snowfall. The deep purple velvet of the armchairs seemed richer somehow, more inviting, and the brass reading lamps scattered throughout the space glowed with a warmth that seemed almost alive. She had strung tiny white lights along the bookshelves upstairs last week, preparing for the winter season, and now they twinkled like earthbound stars, casting gentle shadows that danced across the spines of well-loved books and the soft cream walls. The bells above the door chimed softly, and Emma looked up to see Mr. Chen standing in the doorway, his wool coat dusted with snow, his cheeks pink from the cold, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes as he took in the cozy scene before him. He had been coming to the Velvet Paw for 3 years now, ever since his wife passed, and Emma had watched him slowly come back to life in this space, drawn out of his grief by the simple ritual of morning coffee and the quiet companionship of Luna, who seemed to understand, in the way that cats sometimes do, exactly what he needed. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," Emma said warmly, already reaching for his usual mug, the blue ceramic one with the tiny paw prints around the rim that he favoured. "Can you believe this snow? The forecast didn't mention anything about it." Mr. Chen unwrapped his scarf with slow, deliberate movements, the kind of movements that spoke of a man who had learned to savour each small action rather than rush through life. "The best snows are always surprises," he said, his voice soft and thoughtful, carrying the gentle accent of his homeland. "My wife used to say that snow was the world's way of asking us to slow down, to notice things." He hung his coat on the brass hook by the door and made his way to his usual spot by the window, and right on cue, Luna turned her head, regarded him with those knowing amber eyes, and offered a single questioning meow. Emma smiled as she prepared his coffee, the familiar rhythm of it soothing in its own right, the hiss of the espresso machine, the gentle splash of steamed milk, the delicate art of the pour that created a perfect rosetta on the surface. She had been making Mr. Chen's cappuccino for so long now that her hands moved through the motions almost independently, leaving her mind free to wonder, to think about how the cafe had become a collection of these small rituals, these quiet moments of connection that somehow added up to something larger, something that felt almost sacred in its ordinariness. When she brought the cappuccino to Mr. Chen's table, Luna had already moved from the windowsill to the chair beside him, settling herself with the careful precision of royalty choosing a throne. The old man's hand found its way to Luna's head almost unconsciously, his fingers moving through her soft grey fur in long, gentle strokes that made the cat's eyes drift half-closed in contentment, a rumbling purr starting up in her chest like a small, perfectly tuned engine. "Thank you, Emma," Mr. Chen said, wrapping both hands around the warm mug, and Emma noticed, not for the first time, how the simple act of holding something warm seemed to ease the slight tremor in his fingers, the tremor that had appeared after his wife died and had never quite gone away. "It's a good morning for coffee and contemplation." "It certainly is," Emma agreed, glancing out at the snow, which was falling faster now, the flakes smaller and more purposeful, beginning to obscure the shapes of the garden furniture and transform them into soft, white sculptures. "I have a feeling we'll have quite a few people seeking shelter today." She was right, of course. As the morning progressed, the cafe slowly filled with the quiet shuffle of snow-dusted boots and the soft rustle of coats being removed and shaken out. Sarah arrived for her shift just after 9, her dark hair dotted with melting snowflakes, her cheeks flushed with cold and something else, excitement, perhaps, or simply the particular joy that comes from walking through falling snow. She was an art student at the university, working part-time at the cafe to help pay her tuition, but Emma suspected she would have spent her time here even without the paycheck. Drawn by the peaceful atmosphere and, more specifically, by Mochi, the shy white cat who had taken weeks to warm up to Sarah, but now greeted her with an enthusiasm she showed to no one else. "It's absolutely magical out there," Sarah said breathlessly as she tied her apron, her fingers fumbling slightly with the strings in her eagerness. "The whole campus looks like a snow globe. I stopped 3 times on the way here just to take pictures, though I don't think my phone camera can really capture how beautiful it is." Emma smiled, feeling that warm glow of contentment that came from watching young people discover the world's simple beauties, the kind of discoveries that would stay with them and resurface at unexpected moments throughout their lives. "Why don't you make yourself something warm before you start?" she suggested. "It's going to be a slow morning, perfect for enjoying rather than rushing through." Sarah's face lit up and she immediately set about making herself what Emma had come to think of as her signature drink, a honey lavender latte with oat milk, topped with a careful dusting of dried lavender buds. The process was almost ceremonial in Sarah's hands, each step given full attention, and Emma felt a surge of affection for this young woman who understood, perhaps instinctively, that even the act of making coffee could be a meditation, a moment of mindfulness in a too-fast world. As Sarah settled at a corner table with her latte and a sketchbook, Mochi emerged from her hiding place in the reading nook upstairs, her fluffy white form appearing at the top of the wooden staircase, like a small cloud that had somehow found its way indoors. The cat descended with delicate precision, each paw placed carefully on each step, and made a straight line for Sarah, who immediately set down her pencil to make room on her lap for the small, warm weight of contented cat. The morning unfolded like the pages of a familiar book, each chapter known but no less comforting for being expected. Mrs. Morrison came in around 10, stamping snow from her boots and declaring loudly that she'd nearly stayed home but couldn't bear the thought of missing her Tuesday morning scone, and Emma warmed up a blueberry scone and prepared the ladies' usual Earl Grey with extra honey, listening with half an ear to Mrs. Morrison's cheerful complaints about the weather, the state of the sidewalks, and how her grandson was doing in school, all delivered in the same affectionately grumbling tone. A young couple came in around 10:30. Tourists by the look of them, their eyes wide as they took in the cafe's cozy elegance, and Emma watched them discover the cats with the delight of children finding presents under a Christmas tree. Oliver, ever the social butterfly, immediately claimed them as his own, rubbing against their legs and purring loud enough to be heard across the room. And they settled into the armchairs by the fireplace, with 2 hot chocolates topped with fresh whipped cream, taking turns photographing Oliver's handsome ginger face, while he basked in their attention with shameless pleasure. By noon, the snow had transformed from a gentle fall to a proper snowstorm, the wind picking up enough to send the flakes swirling in complicated patterns against the cafe windows. Emma turned on the small television behind the counter, keeping the volume low, and learned that the storm had surprised the meteorologists as much as it had surprised everyone else, that several inches had already fallen and several more were expected before evening. She sent a quick text to Daniel to make sure he'd made it home safely after his early morning delivery, and received a cheerful reply complete with a photo of his kitchen, where he was apparently already at work on tomorrow's pastries, undeterred by the weather. The afternoon brought a different energy to the cafe, something quieter and more introspective than the morning's gentle bustle. The storm outside had created a kind of suspended reality inside, as if the Velvet Paw had become a ship sailing through white seas, a small haven of warmth and light adrift in a world transformed. Emma found herself moving more slowly, speaking more softly, as if loud noises or quick movements might somehow break the spell, and she noticed that the customers seemed to feel the same way, their conversations reduced to murmurs, their movements unhurried and deliberate. Mr. Chen remained at his table by the window, Luna now fully asleep on the chair beside him, her body curled into a perfect circle, her breath moving her fluffy side in a gentle rhythm that matched the ticking of the old clock on the wall. He had pulled a book from his coat pocket. He always carried a book, Emma had noticed, though she'd never seen him read more than a page or 2 at a time, as if the book were more talisman than entertainment. And he sat with it open on the table, his eyes moving between the printed words and the falling snow outside, his expression peaceful in a way that made Emma's heart ache with a bittersweet mixture of sadness for his loss and joy for his healing. Around 2 in the afternoon, the door chimed again, and Emma looked up to see a young man she didn't recognize standing in the doorway, his shoulders hunched against the cold, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. He looked uncertain, almost apologetic, and Emma recognized the expression immediately. It was the look of someone who had wandered in seeking shelter from more than just the storm, someone looking for a moment of peace in a world that felt too heavy, too complicated, too much. Come in, Emma said warmly, moving out from behind the counter with a welcoming smile. Get out of that cold. Can I make you something warm? The young man's shoulders relaxed slightly as he stepped fully into the cafe, the door closing behind him and muffling the sound of the wind. Yes, thank you. Coffee, I think, just regular coffee. His eyes moved around the space, taking in the soft lighting, the cats, the other customers reading and talking in low voices, and Emma saw the moment when he felt it. That particular magic of the velvet paw, the sense of stepping out of the ordinary world into somewhere safer, softer, kinder. Have a seat anywhere you like, Emma said gently, I'll bring it to you." She watched him choose a table in the corner away from the windows and noticed the way his hands shook slightly as he unwound his scarf. She made his coffee with extra care, adding a generous splash of cream without being asked, because he looked like someone who needed sweetness, and she placed one of Daniel's chocolate chip cookies on the saucer beside the cup. A small gesture of comfort that cost nothing but might mean everything. When she brought it to his table, she set it down quietly and started to turn away, giving him privacy, but his voice stopped her. "Thank you," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he was thanking her for more than just the coffee. "This place, it's really nice, peaceful." Emma smiled. "That's exactly what we're going for. Enjoy the peace as long as you need it." As she walked back to the counter, she saw Shadow, the mysterious black cat who often went hours without being seen, emerge from beneath a bookshelf and pad silently across the room toward the young man's table. Shadow was the most selective of the cafe's cats, the least predictable, and Emma had long ago stopped trying to understand what drew him to certain people at certain times. He simply seemed to know in that uncanny way of cats who needed him most. She watched as Shadow leaped up onto the chair across from the young man, settling himself with casual grace, his yellow eyes fixed on the newcomer's face with an intensity that was somehow not at all threatening. The young man stared back, surprised, and then a small smile appeared on his face, the first genuine expression Emma had seen from him. He reached out a tentative hand, and Shadow, after a moment's consideration, rose and moved close enough to permit a gentle touch. A rare gift that made Emma smile. The afternoon stretched into evening with barely noticeable transitions, the storm outside creating an early dusk that made the cafe's warm light seem even more inviting. Emma turned on the small strand of white lights woven through the iron railing of the upstairs reading nook and lit several of the pillar candles scattered around the space, filling the air with subtle scents of vanilla and sandalwood. The cafe had moved beyond cozy into something approaching enchanted, and Emma felt privileged to be here, to witness this small group of people finding shelter and comfort in the space she had created. Sarah had long since finished her shift, but remained curled in her corner with Mochi and her sketchbook, occasionally sipping from a fresh mug of tea, her pencil moving across the paper in soft, deliberate strokes. Emma had glimpsed her drawings once, delicate studies of the cats in various poses, rendered with the kind of attention that transformed simple observation into art. And she'd been struck by how much love was visible in every line. Mr. Chen still held his vigil by the window, though Luna had woken and moved back to her preferred window sill, the two of them watching the snow together in companionable silence. The young man in the corner had ordered a second coffee and then a third, and Emma had stopped charging him after the first, recognizing his need to simply be somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere that asked nothing of him except his presence. Shadow remained on the chair across from him, sometimes sleeping, sometimes watching, a silent guardian that seemed to ease something in the young man's posture, his expression, his breathing. As 6 o'clock approached, Emma made the decision to close early, not because she wanted to send anyone away, but because the snow had continued to fall with such determination that the streets outside were becoming genuinely difficult to navigate, and she wanted to make sure everyone could get home safely while buses were still running. She announced this gently, apologetically, and was touched by the understanding she received in return, the quiet gathering of coats and scarves, the grateful smiles and warm goodbyes. Mr. Chen was the first to leave, bundling himself carefully against the cold and pausing to give Luna a final stroke, whispering something to the cat that Emma couldn't hear, but that made Luna press her head more firmly into his palm. Sarah helped Emma with a quick clean-up, refusing to leave until Emma did, claiming that walking home through the snow would be an adventure, and they worked together in comfortable silence, washing mugs and wiping down tables while Mochi supervised from her perch on a bar stool. The young man from the corner was the last to rise, and when he came to the counter, Emma waved away his attempt to pay for the second and third coffees. "Consider it a welcome gift," she said warmly. "We hope you'll come back when the weather's better." "I will," he said, and this time his smile reached his eyes. "Thank you, really. I didn't realize how much I needed—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the cafe, but Emma understood perfectly. "We all need a soft place to land sometimes," she said simply. "That's what we're here for." After Sarah left, with a cheerful wave and promises to be careful on her walk home, Emma locked the door and turned to survey her cafe, now quiet except for the cats, and the gentle hiss of the radiators and the muffled sound of wind and snow against the windows. Oliver had returned to his spot by the fireplace, though the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Luna remained on her windowsill, though there was little to see now except darkness and the ghostly swirl of snow in the streetlights. Mochi had disappeared upstairs to her reading nook. Shadow had vanished, as he always did, to whatever secret places he preferred when the cafe was closed. Emma made herself one final cup of coffee, decaf because it was evening and she still had to walk home through the snow, and settled into one of the velvet armchairs, pulling a soft throw blanket over her legs and simply sitting, simply breathing, simply being in this space she loved so much. She thought about Mr. Chen and his gradual healing, about Sarah's artistic dedication, about the young man who had found shelter from whatever storm he was weathering internally. She thought about how the Velvet Paw had become exactly what she'd hoped it would be when she'd first opened the doors 3 years ago. Not just a cafe, but a sanctuary, a breathing space, a place where people could remember what it felt like to be gently held by the world rather than constantly battered by it. Outside, the snow continued its patient work of transformation, covering the rough edges, filling in the cracks, making everything soft and new. Inside, Emma sipped her coffee and felt the warmth of it spread through her chest, felt the contentment of a day well spent, a purpose well served. Oliver's gentle snoring from the fireplace blended with the sound of the wind, creating a kind of winter lullaby, and Luna's silhouette in the window looked like something from a painting, noble and timeless and perfectly at peace. In the morning, Emma knew the city would wake to a transformed landscape, to the pristine white of first snow before footprints and tire tracks marked it up. The sidewalks would need shoveling, and the walk to the cafe would be cold and slow. But inside the Velvet Paw, the coffee would be hot and the radiators warm and the cats ready to offer their particular brand of comfort. And people would come seeking exactly what they'd found today, a moment of respite, a pocket of peace, a reminder that the world could still be soft and kind and beautiful. Emma finished her coffee, rinsed the mug and made sure everything was ready for tomorrow before pulling on her coat and scarf. She took one last look around the cafe, at the sleeping cats and the twinkling lights and the snow-frosted windows, and felt grateful beyond words for this life she'd built, this small corner of warmth in a cold world. Then she turned off all but the security lights, locked the door behind her and stepped out into the snow, which immediately began to dust her shoulders and hair with white like a blessing. The walk home was slow and cold and beautiful, and Emma found herself smiling the whole way, thinking about first snows and fresh starts and the simple miracle of shelter, both the kind that kept out the weather and the kind that kept out the world's harshness. Tomorrow, the Velvet Paw would open its doors again, and the cats would take their places, and the coffee would brew, and people would come seeking comfort, and the gentle cycle would continue, as reliable and necessary as the seasons themselves. And that, Emma thought as she finally reached her apartment and shook the snow from her coat, was more than enough. That was everything.